what I'd like to do in the space of about 10 minutes is highlight the key differences in that great 20th century debate about political philosophy between John Rawls and Nozick. Now, justice is the name of the game here, and precisely what is just. But unlike many other discussions around justice, this doesn't mean legal justice or justice necessarily in terms of power, but in terms of who gets what. Now, Rawls thinks that principles of justice are arrived at by people, by agreements, agreeing on principles of justice when they don't know how they will be affected by that principle of justice. So me thinking of a principle of justice which helps all male Englishmen would not be particularly just according to Rawls. We need to know what would be just before we know how we'll be affected by them. Now, in order to do this, we go into the original position behind the veil of ignorance, all of us, and this is a mind game. You know, imagine a situation in which we all knew everything that there was to know about the world. That is to say, that we know that there'd be different concepts of the good, we know that there would be different professions and so on and so forth. So we're not ignorant of the world, but what we are is ignorant of our position within the world. Now, in that position, the things which we would agree upon, Rawls suggests, would be right. But the thing is, he doesn't just show us a way about achieving justice, he also tries to show us what would be just. Because in this original position, behind the veil of ignorance, Rawls thinks that we would try to maximise our minimum utility. We would try and make the least possible, the worst outcome for us relatively okay. And the reason for this is Rawls is no wide-eyed dreamer. He thinks that basically people are a little bit selfish. They're willing to come together and agree on principles of justice, but they would seek to try and get their best deal. Now, behind a veil of ignorance, we wouldn't know whether to be rich or poor or so whatsoever. So we could be the least well-off person in society. So we all would try and make that person relatively well-off because it could be us. So it's not altruism that makes a principle of justice that we help that worst-off person in society. It's our own selfishness because we don't know if we are that person or not. So some people have criticised this and said that some people would gamble in the original position. They would say, well, we make 20% extremely well off, 40% okay, and 40% a bit poor, on the basis that we'd be either in the 40% or the 20% of the, the okay or the extremely good. But Rawls doesn't think that that's how people work. Now, from this process, Rawls thinks that we get three broad principles of justice. The first is that we should all have equal liberty that's compatible with equal liberty for all. No problems there. Also, he thinks that wherever there are inequalities, that they should always be linked to equal opportunities, so that you can't base it upon any particular thing. That, for again, we can't reward men for being men or Christians for being Christians, because it's not their responsibility that they are there. So there has to be free and open competition for all inequalities in society. Again, perhaps no great problem there. The real issue is the difference principle. He says that all inequalities that exist in society should be to the best benefit of the least well-off person in society. And this factors into that discussion about maximin that we had just a second ago. That what we would try and do is make sure that least well-off person was relatively well-off and could continue to be so, so all the rest of society would be to getting this literally least well-off person society relatively well off. Rawls also talks about the notion of responsibility. He said that we should extend the principle of responsibility that goes with equal opportunities. He says that the reason why we don't reward white people for being white or British people for being British is that they're not responsible for that. We should only ever be rewarded for something that we're actually responsible for. And he says that, broadly speaking, talents we're not responsible for. We're not responsible if we're a brilliant footballer, or we're not responsible if we are a particularly good banker. That is a sort of a gift. Now, this is problematic. So he throws in a double argument. He says, well, suppose you think that you are responsible for your talents, you're certainly not responsible for the way in which your talent is rewarded within a market economy. It isn't someone who's good at football. It's not their responsibility that football is something that lots of other people like, and that therefore that makes footballers relatively well off. So therefore they shouldn't be rewarded for this. So this sounds like quite radical stuff. In actual fact, Rawls, if my reading of him is correct, it's not radically left-wing, but he's supporting a sort of welfare state, a tax and spend system of the kind in which we saw in Europe in the sort of 60s and 70s, and so he would suggest to you that if you're looking at your paycheck and you see this big chunk coming out of tax and you think, well, that's unfair, think yourself back to if you were in this original position and you didn't know everything you knew about society. In that situation, would you find that tax justifiable? So it's a game that all of us can play all the time, and is of course based upon notions of social contracts and Kantianism. Now, Nozick, Anarchy State Utopia, directly criticises Rawls here, and because his conception of justice is entirely different. Justice is not endgame for Nozick. Justice isn't about arranging wealth and all the money we have amongst the people that we have at the moment. It's not like, he says, well, that's not how wealth is created. People create wealth. Justice is historical for Nozick. What we do is say, the money that you've got, have you got that fairly? Have you bought that house? You haven't stolen it, have you? You haven't ripped someone off for it. Just so long as it's been a voluntary transfer and you bought it and you've earned your money in a just manner, each individual transaction of wealth and goods and everything like that's fine, then things are just. Justice, if someone's starving on the streets for Nozick, that might be something that's sad. It might be something that we as a community, not the state, but generally speaking we charitably should do something about. It's not technically unjust, unless that person was robbed of their possessions or had some injustice face them, which meant them losing. Justice is historical, each and every individual transaction. So for Nozick, the state's job is not to redistribute wealth amongst people, to look after that least well-off person in society. The job of the state is simply to protect us and to protect property. And any taxation which is due to take money off one person and give to another, instead is akin to slave labour, because you're forcing the state. The state is forcing you to work and taking money off you. And to illustrate this, he talks about the Wilt Chamberlain principle now. Wilt Chamberlain, for non-Americans, where basketball isn't astonishingly popular, was a basketball player with the LA Lakers. Now suppose, Nozick says, that you live in a society where the distribution of wealth is fair according to whatever you think is fair, and you've got a ticket to see the LA Lakers and you're a particular fan of Wilt Chamberlain, and just the other side of the turnstile is a box which is asking for voluntary contributions of 25 cents to be given to Wilt Chamberlain, because so many people go there and want to see him. Now, you can either put or not put, as you see fit, this 25 cents into this box. Now, what right, Nozick says, does the state have to take any of that money off Wilt Chamberlain, bearing in mind that we all gave it as a completely free donation because we particularly enjoyed them? Nozick's point is that all transfers of money are voluntary in such a light, and the state has no right to tax you for anything other than defence, for law courts, for police, like you might be able to hear in the background, and so on and so forth. That's fine, but not to redistribute. So, consequently, and to conclude, fundamentally, when Rawls and Nozick are talking about justice, they're actually talking about two completely different things. For Rawls, justice is about sharing the money and wealth that we have, and justice is about getting that balance right and the principles which we apply to distributing that money. For Nozick, justice is about historical issues, how each individual transaction takes place. So, consequently, for Nozick, it is unjust for the state to take money off to tax you. It's unjust for Wilt Chamberlain to be taxed. But for Rawls, we can't be said to deserve particular money because, say for example, Wilt Chamberlain wasn't responsible for the fact that he was 7'1", and Wilt Chamberlain wasn't responsible for the fact that basketball is an extremely popular sport. So 10 minutes hasn't done this justice, but I hope that makes some kind of sense.